They say we should have known better than to fall so deep down into this rabbit hole we found. And I was thinking.
Hi, this is Nikolai, and you're listening to my dad, Rafal, co-host James Jardine, and featuring Mr. Jim Tiller on the one and only Down the Security Rabbit Hole podcast. Plug in, listen up, and enjoy.
Deep into this pool of regrettable situations. Pitch black, think back to the last time that we were happy.
Well, all right. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Welcome down the Security Rabbit Hole to another edition of the Down the Security Rabbit Hole podcast. Man, do I have an episode for you guys today. We're going to talk about that relationship between the CISO, the CIO, like who's reporting to who, what's the power dynamic, what are the different roles really doing, how are they working together or not. But first, let's introduce the guest. Everybody knows Jim, but hey, Jim.
Hey, how's it going? I know I say this every time when we start these shows. This is going to be a good one, and I think this is going to be a good one too. I think the whole, I don't want to say controversy. Is that a fair word to use?
It could be.
Role of CISO relative to the CIO. So yeah, that's the can we're twisting the opening on right now.
Oh, that's a good analogy. All right, I'm going to go underneath me here. Larry, how are you?
I am blessed, man. Happy to be here. Love running my mouth, as you know, and this happens to be a soapbox topic for me, and it has been for a number of years. So happy to have it.
And that's why you're here. By the way, tell the good people what you're doing these days, buddy.
Yeah, so I am the co-founder of an organization called Confide. We are what I'll call a next-gen VAR. Ooh, I'm using next-gen.
All right, if you've got next-gen and VAR on your bingo cards, shots up, go.
Yeah. Actually, we're just trying to change the selling motion for cyber executives and their teams, right? The market has gotten so noisy. There's so many products coming out on a daily basis, and it's harder and harder and harder to actually find something that's actually going to help solve problems. So created Confide to help do that.
Very nice. And last but most certainly not least, which somebody we probably should have had on a long time ago, is now going to have a lot of value to add to this conversation. We'll tell you why in a second. Dennis, welcome to the show, sir.
Well, thank you, Ralph. Pleasure to be here. Honored to be here, actually. So I'm looking forward to the conversation. So,
and this is a mutual friend of ours that told me that, hey, you should have Dennis on your show. I was like, all right, like that wasn't hard.
Yeah, we were having drinks, and I brought up the podcast, and he said, yeah, we should get you on that. So that's how we got here.
All right. And tell us a little bit about yourself, who you are, what you do.
Dennis McDonald. I'm the Chief Information and Security Officer for Jack Henry. We provide financial technologies for about 8,500 financial services companies, banks and credit unions, providing core banking and payment products across that spectrum.
And so, folks, if you heard that introduction, he's the Chief Information Security Chief Information and Security Officer, something like that. That like my brain can't possibly properly. Wow, I should edit that, but I won't because it's funny. Process that entire title because that one's that's a mind bender. All right, guys, the relationship between the CISO and the CIO, as I remember it growing up, was less friendly and more like, I don't know, North and South Korea, dogs, cats, oil and water. Like these were not friendly. These were not complimentary, but that has changed over time. How has it changed?
So, yeah, I mean, here's what happened. The only reason the CISO role became a thing was because CIOs didn't understand security. So they needed someone that they could bring in that understood this new thing with firewalls and intrusion detection, right, and access control lists and all these different things that they had no clue from a strategic standpoint. So they brought this role of CISO or VP of security came to play. the reality is no one ever expected it to be a real executive. It was always going to be this subservient role to IT. And what happened was the threats in the game changed, so to speak, as it relates to risk, right? And just technology risk and threats and all that stuff. And the CISO became a titled thing that needed to be held. Thank you, HIPAA, right? HIPAA was one of the early ones that said, hey, you're a healthcare entity. You need to have someone designated as the Chief Information Security Officer, right?
CISO.
Yeah.
Dennis?
Actually, I agree with that. I would carry it one step further. Is I don't think the business understood cybersecurity as well, right? I was previously at one of the big 5 banks for quite a while, and starting from like an 04 to say 16 timeframe. And in the early days, I don't think the business had any understanding of cybersecurity or risk in that sense. So not only do I think it was a challenge for the CIOs, but I think it was a challenge for the business leaders as well to understand, why do we need to prioritize this as opposed to revenue generating products, and what's the value proposition around this? So I think that was a big part of it as well.
Yeah. And there was also the cost factor, right? So, you started adding this cyber or security executive and their team and the infrastructure that comes along with it. And the CIO's budget, they're going to ask for more and more and more. And they're saying, well, wait, why? Why are you spending money on this security stuff? And to your point, Dennis, they didn't tie the need for security to business initiatives. It was just an ancillary cost in tech that was being added on and just continuously growing and growing and growing over time.
So Larry, what changed? Sorry.
Well, sorry to jump in there, Ralph, but I think a few things, right? If you look kind of post-financial crisis, part of what changed was the regulatory environment as well. Right?
Yes.
So you start coming out of, let's call it 2012, 2013, right? So the business awareness starts being created there, but you also have a regulatory environment that starts expanding as a result of the financial crisis. So, that was the time frame when I started seeing a lot of it really take off. And I also think, Larry, to your point, there was a lot of confrontation as I look back during those timeframes. And it was between the business, the CIO, the CRO, and the CISO. And a lot of challenges around that. And, that was I think a reflection point in time.
Yeah, it was. And it's interesting. So, Raph, you asked the question, what changed? The regulatory drivers that began happening and being pushed across so many different industries started to drive that. And then controls became even more popular, right? Because it was a combination of regulatory drivers, third-party risk, where now regulations are requiring you to push down your security controls to these third parties and mandate that they have them. So now non-regulated entities are having to deal with controls that align to regulations because they need to meet the needs of their customers, which are the big banks or these other regulated entities, even to do business with them. Right? In the healthcare side, we had a BAA. You had to, if you want to do business with us, you need to sign this BAA, and that BAA is going to say that you are going to own the risk. If these things happen, right, we're coming after you. And so people are like, whoa, wait. So now, downstream companies that didn't have a regulatory need because they were working with regulated entities begin to have to put security controls in place. And it just started to grow.
Let's take a quick break.
Should I be excited or afraid of AI? The answer is yes. It's both.
Things are going to look so different in the next couple years. You will not be ready for the disruptions that are going to come.
I'm Jeff Nielsen, host of Digital Disruption, the go-to podcast for technology leaders.
Our generation's conflict, I think, is going to be emotional, not economic.
The companies that are going to win are the ones that have a couple of characteristics. Stay ahead of the curve with Digital Disruption. Available now on your favorite podcast platform.
Can I ask a weird question? Why was there such a, I guess maybe reluctance is the right word that I'm looking for, in the business world to have a security become part of the information officer role? We touched on it a little bit at the beginning later in your description, but couldn't security have been a part of the CIO, but like with somebody on their team that could advise? I feel like at some point the chief information officer who was responsible for the company's information, the data, the core of what matters, right, should have had like securing it should have been a responsibility. Am I nuts?
So understand, in the early days of the CIO, it was about enablement and uptime, right? CIOs were looking, hey, you're impacting my 5 nines, my 6 9, right? They were about keeping the applications operational for the business to run. That was like, if you looked at all the metrics that CIOs put together back in the late 90s and early 2000s, it was all around uptime. I've got a responsibility for X number of nines of uptime to ensure the business can operate. What began to happen, because we were asking for downtime. Hey, things need to be patched in a timely fashion. We want to patch once a quarter. That's not okay, right? Because the threats and vulnerabilities they started coming more rapidly. And so we were saying, listen, this is in the wild. This is highly exploitable. So we need downtime now, and you can't plan. And so we started having this antithesis between this battle between CIO and what their metrics are and how they're measured and how they're bonus, and then the security leaders who are worried about a breach, because they're going to be the ones having to stand up an IR team, and they're going to be the ones having to respond to this breach. So they're like, no, we need to patch. No, we don't want to patch right now. We'll patch, 2 months from now. It was just this back and forth that happened. And then you add this up, the additional thing of the risk assessments, right, where we're now exposing and showing where there are problems. It's even more downtime.
Larry, I think too, it depends on the company and the maturity and the journey and all of that, right? Yeah. Because if you look at this, I think, I've been at, some very large financial institutions that were very mature in the sense of how they deal with the business and IT relationship, right? I've been at others where it's an order taker relationship, okay? And then if you look at the financial services industry in particular, in many cases, you have a tremendous amount of M&A. And so over the years, and it depends on how that M&A is done, right? It's rarely done as far as, integrating things into the mothership. For example, I was at Wells when we did Wachovia, which was a massive banking merger, right? So when you look at some of it depends on the maturity of, it actually went, a 3-year plan, and it went relatively well, but there's some aftermath of that, but I'll stay away from that. But I think part of it depends on the existing relationship between the business and the CIO leaders. And then it also depends, to your point, around the relationship with the CIO and risk leaders and other leaders in the company. Because if you're just trying to keep the lights on and keep a fragile environment up and running, and somebody's talking to you about, access management and things like that, you end up in confrontational conversations. And then it becomes a matter of money. Money and investment, right? So then you get into, there's a limited budget everywhere we go. And then it's around where are you going to spend that money and what's the prioritization of it? And that's where I've seen some big battles take place, because some of the security numbers back in the day were significant because you were laying the foundation for it and really starting to build out that first layer of maturity. And there was no budget for it. There was no plan for it. And selling that became a confrontation. Sometimes there were third parties that were brought in to help you sell it. The regulators got involved in some of that. There were examples where I think CISOs and security leaders used the regulators to ensure that they were getting the attention that they needed. And sometimes that didn't turn out so well. So it's a dynamic of where you are within that journey, what the leadership team looks like, what the environment looks like, and all of the above.
Yeah.
Jim, real quick. So Jim, this is something I guarantee is going through your head right now. So I'm gonna say it. When we talk, Larry, you're talking about downtime, right? And the CIO needs good uptime, right? Service availability, business continuity. And the CISO is trying to tell them, like, hey, you got to patch, you got to take the systems down. The one thing that I think always perplexed me and shocked me is that people sort of glossed over the fact, Jim, I get back to you here, like that like if you didn't do the planned downtime, the unplanned one sucked. And it was way more expensive.
That's exactly where I was going.
They never thought about that.
Larry, we used to joke back in the day where you couldn't, even on the CIO side, you couldn't get budget to do something until risk got involved or until there was a crisis, and then the budget was made available.
Right. It's amazing how after a breach, right, you've got this unlimited budget. It's like, well, where was that prior to the breach? Where was even 20% of what you are now throwing at me that seems to have magically appeared, like you got it out of a prize out of a box of cereal that, is now available to me. Like it is mind-boggling because I've been that CISO who the board brought in because of a breach. And I talked to, the team that was there before. They're like, yeah, we could never get budget for anything. We could not get this. We couldn't get this. Now, blank check. I'm like, it makes no sense to me.
I learned early in the process that, the risk organization could be your friend.
Yeah. No, listen, yeah. I tell people also, as an industry, we've adopted for whatever it's worth, this compliance does not equal security, right? And at its surface, yes. But what it's done, unfortunately, it has driven a culture in our industry where we have become adversarial with compliance. And for me, that frustrates me because we should not be adversarial with compliance because compliance actually is the best way to get budget, right? It is the best way to go to the board and actually get things you need is to become compliant. So if you can create a story, right? And to your point, Dennis, about risk, right? Risk and compliance are our friends, right? Yep. Yes. At the statement level, being compliant does not equal security is absolutely factual. However, if you know how to communicate, influence, and draw those dotted lines to both risk and compliance, you can get a lot of the budgets you need. You just have to be transparent about what that is.
I was going to ask an equally odd question from earlier, but one of the things, Larry, you brought up compliance a few times, and some requirements, regulation require a CISO now, right? That's sort of a pseudo. I mean, HIPAA, that was 90s, and it's kind of evolved. There's a lot of them that are coming out like that now. Do you think that created sort of a byproduct of where I do want a CISO so I can attach that compliance noose around the neck, right? So it's not the CIO, though. That's the security side. That's the compliance. Do you think that was also a contributor to the growth of having a CISO? Just out of your thought. Okay.
It's part of that chief information scapegoat officer, right? So I can technically now have this person who's ultimately responsible for these things because the regulators have said we need a role like this. However, I'm not going to give them authority to actually do anything. Like that's the challenge with the CISO role is, yes, you've been provided. I won't say burdened. I'll say provided with all the responsibility, right, from the regulators, from your third parties, all these things. Talk to our CISO. He's right. So you've got to have knowledge that ties across all of these different components of the business and the regulators and your customer base and all these different things. But you're not given the authority to act appropriately on them, right, without complete buy-in from everybody across the table, including God and all his disciples. Like it can be wildly maddening at times, the level of depth that you have to go to as a CISO to get approval to do some things that we think is table stakes.
You hit on this earlier, I think even before we started, Larry, though. I think that's evolved quite a bit, though, right? I mean, and I think, too, it depends on who the individual is and what role they play within the organization. And the reason I bring that up is, like, I attend a lot of, panels and things where they want to talk about cybersecurity, and it ends up, what are your top priorities? Is it identity? Is it data or whatever? And I frequently say it's enterprise transformation, right? Because part of it is around things like IT simplification. So if you look at the partnership between the CISO and the CIO, every piece of hardware and software you eliminate reduces risk, right?
Right.
So in many cases, I think, again, it goes back to where you're at in that journey, What's the culture of the company you're with? What's the leadership team look like? What role do you really play? I mean, I know CISOs that play a huge role in different organizations. And I know some, to your point, that are fighting to just get in front of the board. And especially in the medical industry and some other areas that where I have, friends and peers. And so I think that's a big part of it is, what does the leadership team look like? What does the board look like? What does the culture look like? And, and then what level, what do you want to influence and how do you want to go after that? And it's a different battle than I think it was back in 2013, 2014.
So it's interesting you say that. So, and I agree with you wholeheartedly. And I talk with, we've got this group called the CISO Society, and there are 1,700 plus, cyber executives in there. And so I have this conversation a lot in that group, as well as at events that I travel to across the country. And the challenge is to your point, yes, it's evolved a lot because people are starting to see, organizations that are more mature are starting to recognize that cybersecurity is a business enabler, right? And it is, and I call it the not running faster than the bear, running faster than your friend scenario. Meaning, if you're a financial services company, right, you don't need to have everything locked up and buttoned down and be perfect. You just need to be better than the other financial services companies.
Better than your neighbor.
Right. That's it. That's all you got to do, right? If there's robberies going on in the neighborhood, I have more cameras than my neighbor, so I'm less likely to potentially, have somebody come on my property. But that's evolved a lot. What unfortunately has not evolved a lot is two things. So number one is there hasn't really been any great formal training for cyber executives to the role of CISO, right? Now, here's the challenge for that. There are some trainings out there for the role of CISO. The bigger problem is companies don't know what the hell they're hiring. They hire because they've been told they need to get this CISO role in. And then they hire someone either deeply technical, not technical at all, and it ends up being a mismatch for whatever it is they needed inside their organization because they don't know how to hire. They don't understand how to pick. They've been told they need this, and then they hear someone who is articulate and speaks all these different things, and they think it's going to be a fit. But if you're a CISO who's not technical and you're reporting to a CTO, good luck, right? Like, so there's so many different dichotomies of how to go about this, and there's no real straight line. And so the CISO role, unfortunately, continues to be the brunt of all of it.
Well, I think, Raf, if I've listened long enough, is you just come in and start talking about zero trust.
There's another one.
Bingo. Wait a second. The only thing another one. Let me get my coin out.
That's amazing, guys. Can I maybe pivot this a little bit into because I think I understand. I think I understand the relationship a little bit more kind of in the past and now. I look at Dennis's role, Chief Information and Security Officer, CISO, like Jim says, CISO. So that's an interesting place. Is that the future? Is that a one-off? Is that something you guys think we're going to start seeing more? Like, is that because I started seeing the knock in the socks, like in some cases start to get closer as companies start to do like things like try to like not have two teams looking at the same network traffic and wondering if we can figure out if there's a better way to do it. Well, is this just an inevitable remerging of because I've heard that the CISO would become the chief risk officer. I've heard the CISO will become the chief compliance officer. I've heard the CISO will become, reporting to the CEO and be the second most powerful person in the company. Wrong. I've also heard a whole bunch of things, right? So is Chief Information and Security Officer next?
I'll chime in on that one. No, I don't think it is, right? I think, again, this goes back to a point in time and where you are and where you're at on that journey. I think in our particular case, it made sense to bring them together for a few reasons, because we're really trying to look at the strategy between the CTO office, the CIO, the CISO, and I'll even throw Chief Data Officer in there as well, and really trying to make sure that we create a strategy that has those 3 or 4 legs in conjunction with the business, okay? And so, but I think that ultimately it makes sense to have them separate, and I think that long term, that's likely where it ends up again. But there's sometimes a need to try to bring some things together and evolve it, and I think this is an example, or my role is an example of that at this point.
So I'll chime in on that, and I'll agree with an early point that Dennis made is it's going to depend on the organization. I agree. I do not think that this is the future. I'm seeing in the conversation I'm having a lot of security leaders, CISOs, taking over infrastructure. So what happens is the CIO moves out of technology completely and goes to the business, and they become almost like a consultant to the business, where they are responsible for coming up with and working with the business to figure out what technology is going to be able to be utilized to enable the business to do better. Once they go through that, they come up with what that is. The CIO turns that over to the chief infrastructure and security officer, and that person then goes out, buys a tech. They've got responsibility for all of the IT stuff, right? So patching, architecture, installation, all of that stuff, where that CIO is now almost like a consultant to the business and between the infrastructure team, which is more operationally charged now. I'm seeing that actually happen quite a bit. And then you've got the chief data officer. So Dennis mentioned that. The chief data officer is now, like, I'm seeing the CISO reporting to a chief data officer, where the chief data officer has a CIO and CDO type role. So it's all over the place, man. Like, I ultimately think, so I'll get on a little bit of a soapbox for less than 10 minutes.
Get on?
Yeah. So I ultimately think that we, old school practitioners, ruined the CISO role because we wanted more footprint. Right. We wanted more people. We wanted to be from under the CIO, because the CIO and us were at odds in the late 90s and early 2000s. And we wanted to own more, but there was a 3x salary difference between how we were compensated. Right. And so as we fast forward to where we're at today, the CISO, in my perspective, should not be an operator. There should be an operator under the CIO that manages security like the infrastructure teams manage infrastructure. But there should be a CISO that sits outside of that, almost like a chief risk officer, right, that identifies, assesses, and holds the organization accountable to a set of standards that's agreed to at the board level.
So you're talking about splitting. IT did this, where you're splitting policy and execution apart.
Yes, 100%.
But right. I imagine that would work better in larger companies than your typical, like Fortune 1000 probably, Fortune 500 most likely. Below that, there's too many. Like feels like you're creating too many executive roles. No,
right? Too many chiefs. Yes.
Yeah. Maybe it's not even. Maybe that operations role isn't even a chief. It's just a director level.
No. The operations role should not be a chief. So there was one health system in the mid 2000s that did this, where the CISO was peers to the CIO. They were out of Seattle. I'm trying to remember the name of it. But there was a director of security reporting to the CIO that ran the SOC and did all of the operational things of managing firewalls, managing, IDS, all of that stuff. The CISO sat on the outside. He had an architecture team, right? And he was meeting with the business. And so when the business had initiatives that they were going on, he was there as part of the ideation, and he would help architect what needed to happen. As those things got executed, it got handed back off to IT to manage from a day-to-day standpoint.
Yeah, and I think part of it, too, is that whole evolution of going from on-prem to the cloud, to the public cloud, right? And then what do operations look like? There's 10 different ways that you've seen that structured across different organizations as well, right? So there's synergy opportunities that you can build. I would almost characterize it like back in the day, it's like governance, right? Sometimes you need to bring things together to provide the right governance structure and then federate them. But I think there's different time, different place, and it depends again on your company, your culture, your leadership, where you're at in the maturity curve, and all the technology that you have across that spectrum. So I don't think there's a one size fits all in today's world. And one other final point I was going to make too is that I do think one of the things that's changed now is there's been so much publicity around cybersecurity and breaches that it feels like we no longer have to fight the why. There might be different, there's nuance in there, and there's different, getting budget in that, but I don't think anybody needs to really be, to explain to them why you need to care about this. Whereas even 5, 6, 7 years ago, we were still trying to sell that.
Right.
It's almost now about like not failing the audit. Do you agree with that as well? Is that like the longest pole in the tent now?
Well, go ahead, Dennis.
Go ahead, Larry.
So what I'm seeing is right now, if you don't have a cyber leader in place, it's going to limit who you can even do business with, right? Just at the end of the day, right? Because third parties are saying, what do you have in place? And they're asking you all these questions, right, of how you protect stuff, right? So whether you're a SaaS company, whatever that is, you are getting questions from companies that say, hey, how are you doing these security-based things? If you can't answer that, it hinders your business. Your ability to grow as a business just gets hindered. So that's, for me, what I'm seeing is a huge starter driver. Because even startups, right? It doesn't matter what industry. It could be a cyber startup, a tech startup, fintech, whatever. Every single one of them, when they're coming and going to market and trying to get customers, the customers are coming back and say, answer these questions of how you secure our data, how all of these different things that they're like, blah, 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 blah. So that's why the whole vCISO market is blown up, because everybody's needing these things answered, and they don't have the ability to answer them themselves, and they can't afford somebody full-time in what the rates are for CISO. So they're getting these fractional security leaders to come in, help in these small ways just so that they can grow their business.
Yeah, I'll pile on to that a little bit too, in the sense, I mean, our clientele, we have quite a few credit unions and community banks, right? That's our base. And when you look at that, there are small credit unions of 100 million. They don't have standalone CIOs and CISOs. In many cases, we are that role for them, right? And then there's other ones that are, $50 billion banks that they have, very robust structures. So when you asked the question earlier, is it for big companies only? In many cases, every one of those companies is different, is in a different position. And some not only don't have CISOs, they don't have CIOs,
right,
and they don't have CTOs. And or they consider that their providers, their third-party providers, play that role for them. So then you get back to Jim's question around compliance and audit and all of that, is the level of due diligence required is significant, right? I know in our particular case, it's kind of threefold. That we refer to it as being even more regulated than the big banks, because we have all the banking regulators, and we have all the credit union regulators, and we're also considered a strategic solution provider, which is a different set of regulators as well, right? So yeah, there's a big part of that as far as the due diligence piece of that and the level of scrutiny, and that went up again. We talked about kind of post-financial crisis type thing, but it went up again around 2 years ago when we had the Silicon Valley Bank event. So then, and when the SEC and the OCC got, what I'll call a bit embarrassed in that sense, that took it and brought it to another level of scrutiny around what's required and what the regulators were looking for.
So we're about out of time, but I want to throw one more thing at you guys in like 60 seconds or less. When you look at the priorities of the CIO and CISO, what are they right now? Let's go CIO first. Dennis?
Well, I think firstly, I'll just say safety and soundness are going to be number one, right? So literally I'm sitting down with my team this week and going through some of that, and that becomes number one for me. If it's hard to do business if you're not secure. So I think the first thing you have to be is you have to be secure, and you have to have the right things in place to just table stakes to run the business. And it's interesting too, because I think a couple episodes you had Sam on, and you asked him a similar question. Best at the basics. I thought he used that term, right? I just feel so strongly, and that goes back to like Larry's comment around where you're at in the neighborhood type thing. Is that I think it's essential to you've got to be best at the basics and make sure that you have that foundation in place. So for me, it starts with safety and soundness, and then you start moving into stability. Things like that. I would say, I don't have them in front of me, but it's a case of safety and soundness, operational excellence, the enterprise transformation, things like that are the keys to me. And I'll make one final comment as we're trying to get to the end. I think part of it's you got to have a strategy. You need to have a proactive strategy that you can sit down, whether it's a standalone CIO, a standalone CISO or not, to sit down with your business partners to have these conversations proactively as opposed to in an ad hoc fashion.
Yeah.
Larry, CISO, CIO?
Yeah, so I'll echo this. And so for me, I'll take the CISO perspective. It is important for the CISO to be at the table for ideation, which means as a CISO, if you are not thought of as a business enabler, you are going to fail. Period, point blank, right? Because that means you're a technician, and executive technicians aren't a thing. And once they realize that you will be out of a role. So for me, I tell every CISO that I mentor or chat with on a regular basis when we get on this topic, your job is not to tell the business what they can't do, but your job is to let them know how they can achieve their goals securely, right? Period, point blank, right? It is how can they achieve their goals securely. Now, you're not going to be able to mitigate every single risk that comes up based on the business's strategy. You're not. You can advise them on it, and you can then help them put the proper controls in place where possible, right, as best you can. But it's that level of transparent conversation that A, builds trust, B, enables influence, and will allow the security leader to be at the table at ideation. If you're not at the table when the business comes up with the idea and you're only at the table once they've decided to go down a path, you are doomed, and you are setting yourself up.
Larry, can I add one comment to that too, Rob, before you jump in? And that is that I think part of it's a mindset too. We operate under the, how can we get to yes as opposed to no, right? So, if you look at the age old, the organization of no, there are many cases where we won't be able to do something, but then it becomes, what would it take to get to yes, right? And if we operate under that principle in light of what you were talking about, then I think it gives us that seat at the table to have those conversations.
100%. 100%.
I like it. That is a fantastic place to end on that great agreement. Guys, this has been a great episode. I typed out quite a bit. This is always fascinating because I am a student of the executive roles. I like watching new pieces appear on a chessboard that have never been there before. I've seen chief information officer. I've seen chief risk, chief data. I've seen chief AI officer. I've seen all sorts of. There's some that leave, some that go. Chief security officer, chief information security officer, chief cybersecurity. There's all sorts of roles, right? And different strokes for horses for courses, as they say. It matters the kind of business you are and the type of things you can afford to do. I think it's clear that what you can't afford to do is not have a good CISO or a good security function.
Yep.
Because guys, we've talked through this pretty much to the end, to the logical end, but I will say it again because I think it bears repeating. If you're not taking the time to take the risk head on, it will hit you, as Boz Luhrmann said, on an idle Tuesday, and it's going to hurt. And I love that. I love that my graduating year, Boz Luhrmann's "Wear Sunscreen" became a song, and from a graduation speech. Man, I love that. There's that line about if you're not paying attention, the biggest things won't hit you when you're ready for them. They'll hit you on some idle Tuesday. And I always think about that. But anyway, guys, it's been a pleasure. Thanks for joining the show. Dennis, don't be a stranger. Come on back. Larry, you're always welcome. And I'm looking forward to what you're doing next, because putting the V back in VAR is going to be as we were talking about before the show. Given 3 out of 4 people on this podcast background, we've got work to do.
Right.
We've played that game. We know the ugly side of that, where it can become. And I think there's a lot of work to do in the industry, bringing trust back, not just on the vendor side, but also on the internals. right?
Yep.
It's bringing trust back to the practice of security and bringing trust back to the customer base and all that stuff. So again, Dennis, thank you. Larry, thank you. Jim, always awesome to have you aboard. Folks, thank you so much for listening. This has been another episode of the Down the Security Rabbit Hole podcast. I hope you took as many notes as I did. And if you're subscribed to the YouTube stream or follow us on LinkedIn, then you know that we are live streaming these, and Larry's gone incognito and hiding. That's funny. Thanks for listening. We'll catch you guys another time, another place, on another Down the Security Rabbit Hole podcast. Bye-bye.
This is Bella. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to leave my dad a review and share this with your friends. Bye.